you for being a friend. Travel down the road and back again. Your heart is true, you're a pal and a confidant. If you threw a party and invited everyone you knew, you would see the biggest gift would be from me, and the card attached would say, thank you for being a friend.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Beloved Journal on this beautiful weekend or whenever you're tuning in. I'm so grateful that you took the time to tune in and hear this conversation today. I really think you're going to enjoy it. On the podcast today, we have Brooke Stanford to discuss her work in the fashion industry and how she finds beauty there. This season, again, we're trying to find beauty and the beauty that people find in their profession, in their professional work, in their personal lives, wherever they might find it. And I think this episode really highlights that and encapsulates what we're after. Brooke is a designer and purchaser for well-known fashion and design companies. She's been a regular at the Paris and New York Fashion Weeks for a while now. Most importantly to me, though, I met Brooke during my final year in my undergraduate studies at Appalachian State University. She and some friends desperately needed an Old Testament tutor, and I was glad to oblige. Even still, she has far surpassed her being a pupil and has become a friend and someone I admire. And I just think she's so wonderful in her work and what she does, and it really shines out in her professional life. So let's listen into this conversation with Brooke Stanford. I hope you enjoy it. As always, check out our podcasts wherever you get your podcasts, or on YouTube now, which is kind of cool, so you can listen to it there as well. Anyway, let's listen in. Brooke Stanford, thank you so much for coming on Beloved Journal.
Thank you for having me. I'm so honored.
Well, you have been in the fashion industry for some time now. Tell us about what you've done in the business and where it's taken you and what adventures you've been on during your time in the industry.
Yeah. Most recently, I had the privilege to buy for a luxury women's specialty store, and I was buying ready to wear accessories, jewelry globally, which was super fun. We got to travel to New York and Paris multiple times a year. It was such a privilege to meet so many amazing artists across the world and to be able to bring their craft back to the United States and share it with our clients locally in Los Angeles and in Charlotte. I have always loved clothes. I have quite an obsession, I guess you could say. So it brings me so much joy to be able to bring that to people every single day. And I just love what I do, and I'm excited for my next chapter and to dive into some more creativity of my own and see where that takes me.
One of the reasons I wanted to have you on the podcast is that for some time you said you worked as a purchaser for a clothing business, and you kind of did that for very well. And you have to have an eye that would not only appreciate beauty for like yourself, like from your perspective, like, oh, I would wear this, but that others might appreciate that beauty as well, or be interested in what you see. How did you guide yourself in that work? And how did you perceive beauty? How did you perceive like this is something that's worthwhile and should come back with me to the States, to Los Angeles, to Charlotte, or to wherever? How did you perceive that and have that perception that that was something that was worthwhile?
It's so instinctual for me. I wish I had a better answer. I'm very confident and certain in my work. I always have been. And I don't, my dad is a contractor, and he grew up with I grew up around him with a very particular eye. And I, if I see something that is beautifully made, I am drawn to it immediately. I love looking at the inner workings of a garment and seeing how it was put together, and try to imagine the construction process, and especially pieces that are so intricately embroidered or there's details, or there's always a story behind it. I'm really drawn to the story of the garment and the maker and the inspiration behind it, and ultimately the beauty that we get to see and that we get to share with our clients and with the world ultimately, because when they wear that piece into the world, it brings beauty and joy to those who get to experience it.
You know, you said you've been across the world from New York to Paris, Los Angeles, Charlotte, all these places doing this work. And I'm really curious about how you see the world through this industry. I mean, it's got to be interesting, right, to see Paris through Fashion Week, to see New York through Fashion Week. It's a different experience than I think what everybody else has experienced. What has that been like for you, and what have you seen kind of firsthand that's different maybe for other people?
Yes. Firstly, I must say it's not as glamorous as it appears, as you see on social media. We would always laugh going to these runway shows in New York and Paris, and we were there to work. And we might be sitting in the front row at the Gabriella Hirsch show in Brooklyn, but ultimately, like, we're there to work, and we're in our sneakers, and we're running back across the bridge to make another appointment 10 minutes later. And it's I never really thought of it in any other way than I don't even know if I'm answering your question, but I just do it. I don't know how. I don't know. It's kind of to your last questions. It's so instinctual. It's just a part of my work, and I love it so much. I I think I choose to see beauty in all things. I think I recently have this past year gone through quite a bit of loss in my personal and professional life. And I've made the conscious decision to see beauty in all things, and in people especially, and try to get curious and understand their story. And I think on a surface level, the fashion industry can seem so materialistic, but I think ultimately people just want to be able to express themselves in a way, and in a lot of ways people do that through their clothing. And I think it's so beautiful, and it's tells so much without saying anything. And I think you can really understand someone in the way that they present themselves to the world by what they choose to put on every day.
I know that in some ways all work can be taxing. How we do work is taxing sometimes. But if the work you do is anything like what we saw, not to make it into something it's not. If it's anything like The Devil Wears Prada, the work-life balance is not always easy or fun or something that you would be consider ideal. How do you care for yourself during those periods where you are running back and forth across the bridge, or when you are doing the things that are so hard to do when, for anyone for that matter, but on top of it, you're so busy already. How have you learned to care for yourself in those moments?
I think sleep has always been my top priority. I love to sleep, and I make sure I get at least 8 hours a night. I'm typically a 9 to 6er. I like my sleep, even when especially when I'm traveling. A really great meal before bed is always great. We loved when our hotels had bathtubs in them, that sort of thing. Just small ways of self care. I definitely could always have been better. We weren't eating the healthiest of food. We're eating gummy bears and showroom appointments, or macaroons in Paris, or croissant, or whatever we can grab running from here to there. But I think ultimately for me, it was always just time at the end of the day to sit down, be grateful for the day, really reflect on the beauty that I had the privilege to witness, and just sit with myself and be alone. I love my solitude, and sitting in a bath at the end of a long work day is probably the best thing that I could do for myself.
I imagine that your work in industry, I mean, it is so subjective, right? Like someone can have an opinion on something that is in your opinion, completely wrong, but their opinion is the one that matters in that moment. Is that hard to work with other people's opinions of beauty and thoughts that might be different from your own? I mean, I know you've got to do it. It's kind of part of the game, right? But like, is that hard when you see something that you see has potential, but they may not, or vice versa? I mean, what is that like for you?
Yeah, I think it's all about perspective. I think you can respectfully disagree with someone. I think I always tried to stand behind my decisions, and I always tried to connect with the person who was had opposing views and try to understand what their perspective is. And I mean, I think that's the beauty of the world, that we all have different perspectives. And I always would chuckle when I would spend time on the sales floor around clients, and they might not know that I was the buyer and make like, this is the ugliest thing I've ever seen. And I didn't necessarily buy everything that I loved or that I would wear. I appreciated the story, and I would try to bring beautiful things to clients, and all clients have different perspectives. I had different perspectives. The other buyers on my team had different perspectives. And I think it was just always to get back to basics, understand that other people have different perspectives, and we could learn from that.
When you see a piece of clothing that you're about to purchase and it strikes you as beautiful or something that really people need to see or experience in their own life, what goes through your mind?
I get really excited. I'm like a kid in a candy store, and I get excited all over again when 6 months later my ops girl is opening the box and I get to see it again out of the showroom and off the model and in real life. Or it happens again when a client walks out of the fitting room wearing that same garment. Um it's pure joy for me. I love seeing the glow on someone's face when they put on a beautiful piece of clothing that makes them feel really good. There's really nothing like it. It speaks volumes.
The work that we do can be so intertwined with who we are and what we espouse and what we believe about the world. Um, in a world that is filled with not so pretty things, you're trying to bring beauty into it. And I don't want to get too philosophical and think that
Yeah.
overthink this, but you are trying to do something that is both kind of countercultural and counterintuitive. Because the world seems to kind of tend to lean towards the ugliness and the ugly side of things. Um, I'm curious, like when you have your Parisian apartment and you're retiring and you're like, you know what, I'm good with this, I've done everything. What will you have wanted to accomplish in that effort to bring beauty into the world?
I think if I can make one person feel absolutely beautiful one night of their life, I will say I'm successful. I
Say
think
more
it's as
about that.
small
Yeah.
as that. I think it's just, I mean, it's like buying the person behind you in line of coffee. It's just, you have no idea the impact you made on their life or on their day or on the hour. It's um just small acts, I think, that could change someone's life. Or um I think especially for women, and I've worked with a lot of women in their midlife, and there's a lot of changes happening, and there's so much to be said about a woman who feels great in her body and in the way that she presents herself to the world and whatever she may do. And especially if she's standing up on stage at a conference in front of 100,000 people, and I had the privilege to dress her and she feels at her peak in her career, that is success for me.
Is it hard to work in an industry that is so based? I mean, there's so much potential for things to kind of go awry with like self-image and self-perception
and how we view the world. I mean, you hear kind of the horror stories, and maybe some of them have merit, maybe some of them don't, but of how women view themselves in a world that is again bent towards the pointing out the imperfections, the pointing out the lack of, and how have you grappled with that in your own work to ensure that people feel their best selves?
I think it's very challenging, and especially at at my age, I I think some women in their middle age, they don't want to hear from someone in their 20s or 30s that hasn't experienced it yet. Some do, but a lot don't, and so that's always challenging. And I think it's important for myself to surround myself with people of different ages, of different backgrounds, different stories, different perspectives that all have something to offer. And I think we can all learn from that. It's challenging. It's something that I think about every single day. And I never really thought about it when I was in school and studying this and thinking about taking this career path. I grew up in an environment where I never heard my mother say anything poorly about her body. I never heard my dad speak poorly of my mother. I wasn't raised in that environment, fortunately. So my sister and I are very confident and sure of ourselves. And I really just try to bring that in everything that I do, and especially in the young women that I work with, that I hope to inspire. And I even the older women that I hope to inspire, that just have a different perspective. We're all beautiful. We all have something to offer. And I think, just again, going back to putting someone in something that makes them feel confident and beautiful in whatever chapter of life they're in.
Finally, we've been asking everyone on the third season of Beloved Journal the same question to close, kind of to ground ourselves in what we're talking about with beauty and the perceptions therein. What is the most beautiful thing you have ever seen or witnessed?
Yes. Mm, that is very hard. I must say, when I first moved to Los Angeles and I was driving home, and traffic is, yes, as bad as they say it is. And it took me oftentimes an hour and a half to go 7 miles home. And I was sitting on the freeway, and it was probably this time of year. I moved in about March, April, and the snow covered mountains were in front of me, and there's palm trees to my right and left, and the most gorgeous orange sunset behind me. And I was like, this cannot be real. This cannot be real. And I still think about that. And when I'm feeling down or I need inspiration, I get in my car and I drive, because quite honestly, the beauty we see in the world around us is unparalleled. And there's something so magical about the snow-covered mountains and the sunset and the palm trees, and it's 60 degrees, and it doesn't make sense, and it shouldn't make sense, and it's so beautiful.
Sometimes beauty just doesn't make sense, does it?
Exactly. And I think that's some of the most beautiful things. There's no explanation. It's there for us to appreciate.
Well, I
And I'm
have
so
to,
grateful to see
yeah,
that.
yeah. And, I have to say, and I'll disclose this for everybody to know, you have come a long way since you were in an Old Testament tutoring class that I was leading. You have done so much, and it's wonderful to witness, and it's wonderful to see you be so successful in what you do, because you're changing perceptions, and I think that's really important, um, especially in a world that is so deeply broken right now. We can cling to the things that are beautiful and that are important to us, and you're doing just that. So I want to thank you for coming on Beloved Journal, And thank you for sharing with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It was such an honor.
Beloved Journal is a podcast on a mission. Check out our other episodes wherever you get your podcasts. Today's podcast was hosted by the Reverend Rob Lee. Find him on Twitter at RobLee4 or on Instagram at RevRobLee. You can find our social media on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter by searching for Beloved Journal and finding our logo. Beloved Journal's theme music is a cover of the Golden Girls theme song done by Mipsa. Seriously, they're the best band in the world. This podcast was the dream of Stephanie Lee and was produced by Maggie the Golden Doodle and Frank the Poodle. Go show the world that it's worth fighting for. And as always, thanks for listening.